I'm young and I haven't been using for long. Are there important health messages I should know?
Yeah, I think there's important things to think about as a young person, and some of them are that obviously the more drugs you take, the more frequently you take them, the more messy you're going to get. So that's probably the number one important health message. The second thing is we know that people who start drug use a bit younger may end up with a few more difficulties later on. They may be more at risk of difficulties emerging over time because they're starting during their adolescence.
You shouldn't be expanding your brain before it's grown. And the truth is that young people's brains are maturing organs. They haven't yet made all those little connections that allow them to do everything in the world. And if you start putting drugs into a very young brain at an early age, you can have significant effects both upon that person's kind of overall brain functioning, but particularly their mood. And although there's a lot of stuff in the press that says smoking cannabis and taking speed will send you mad, the truth is, if you're a young person, the younger you start taking drugs, the greater the risk of you having any kind of significant mental health consequences. If you want to reduce overall your risks related to drugs, I suppose there's a couple of key messages. The first thing is, don't mix drugs with alcohol. There is no combination of alcohol with any drug that tends to be safe. In fact, they're always associated with the increased risk of adverse effects and risks, particularly kind of increased sedation, overdose, aspiration, vomiting and death.
And I think another thing that's important is listening to people around you. If they say you look like you're getting messy, then listen to that. And I think also if you are not getting those messages, ask people, do I seem okay? Am I seeming different? Something or other like that, just to get a check on how people think you're travelling and how you're going.
And likewise, if you see a mate looking messy on the dance floor or at a party, don't let them just kind of continue drinking or taking drugs until something dreadful happens. Go up and let them know. If you're really worried about a mate because they seem unrousable, then you need to call an ambulance. And some young people get fearful about calling an ambulance because they think they might get in trouble from that kid's parents or from the ambulance. Across the board, parents and ambulance people are generally going to be thankful that you've been responsible enough to act on the concerns for a mate. If you're worried about a friend and you see that they're looking messy, put their welfare first, and no one's ever going to judge you badly because you've done that. If you're going to use a drug for the first time that you've never used before, the advice has got to be use the smallest dose possible and make sure there's someone around who is not drug affected. This is particularly an issue with drugs like GHB, where there is a tiny difference between a dose that may lead to intoxication and one that leads to coma and overdose. And sometimes people don't have to use drugs in a very high level at all to end up with what I think is a drug-related problem. If you're a 17-year-old girl, you go out clubbing, you drop a pill, you have a couple of tokes on a bong, and then you end up sleeping with someone, you might end up getting pregnant, getting herpes. That's a problem. Depending on who you are and who you sleep with, you might not end up with herpes, you might end up with hepatitis or HIV. For me, that's a drug-related problem. And the problem is that drugs impair your judgment. That's one of the reasons that people take drugs. When it comes to powders and pills, the truth is you don't know what's in it. Dealers actually aren't chemists. They probably didn't knock them up in a pharmaceutical laboratory. Dealers are people who are involved in business. Their primary outcome is to make money. And so, much as though you might like to think that your drug dealers got your best interests at heart, actually what they've really got is probably the interest in the bank.
And we know that quite often people don't get what they're paying for and the drug that they're taking is not what they think it can be. Those things are quite risky. There's risks of overdose, there's risks of other problems coming from that, mental health problems and so on, if you don't know what you're taking.
The other sorts of things that intoxication tend to lead to are violence. Most violence and accident emergency presentations on Thursday, Friday, Saturday night are due to young blokes who have got into fight, virtually always with alcohol, but if you throw a bit of drugs in as well, that makes the whole thing a bit worse. And nobody wants to get in fights, throw up and look like an arse. And I suppose that's one of the kind of real paradoxes here, is that while we can accept that people want to take substances and alcohol to get intoxicated, nobody wants to use those drugs in a way that will cause themselves or other people harm. Most people who die on the roads in Australia are young males between the ages of 19 and 24. They die in the early hours of Thursday, Friday, Saturday morning, and lots of those people have got alcohol and drugs on board. The best way to get you and your mates home safely is to drive sober and without any drugs on board. And nobody wants to kill their mates or themselves in a car crash. It's much easier to make safe, sensible decisions before the night starts than when you're off your face.
Do you choose a drug that you don't inject? It's much wiser to not inject, if at all possible. Secondly, that if you are choosing to inject a drug, that you make sure you use clean needles. And if you can't get clean needles, that you clean them somehow and you find out information about how to properly clean, or as well as one can clean, use injection equipment, but preferably not to use and reuse equipment, and certainly not to share equipment. And those things are around, obviously, risk of infections such as HIV, hepatitis C. These are very important health messages that young people need to realise. Now, there's a lot of, I guess, myths and rumours around that young people can't get services, or they can't access services, or that adult services don't want them around. Some of those things are true, and I think it's important to try to check on some of those myths with other users. And it may be that a service really only takes people over 18 or over 24 or something like that, and so you may not have access to those sorts of services if you're a young person. However, there are some services around, specific youth services in some states, and some of those are withdrawal services, what they often call detox. For example, there's detox services in Queensland, in Victoria and New South Wales. And some services also provide residential rehabilitation services. And for example, New South Wales, Victoria have those, and some states are developing them at the moment, Western Australia, Tasmania. So you can access youth-specific services. At other times, you'll really want to be able to get clean equipment, and particularly if you're injecting. That can be problematic at times, and I think if you talk to other users about, given your age, how one might access them, what's their advice, and one may use either pharmacy or a secondary outlet or something like that. It is possible that what we call secondary outlets, another agency that's not specifically a needle and syringe exchange, may be able to give you equipment because they've been authorised to do that. So you need to check what's available for you as someone perhaps under 18. In Victoria, some of the services for youth go up to the age of 24. Getting information, I think word of mouth is pretty important. Asking other people, I think that's an important thing to start with. Asking experienced users or users who have been in treatment and what they think of what they got, where to go, where to find out, how to find out. If you want to do it more anonymously, there's web-based information available, such as AIDEN, and information on that's provided within this video. Secondly, you might want to contact ADIS, the Alcohol and Drug Information Services in your state. Again, information is available for you on those services within the video. Some of the other web-based services are available. There's the Australian Drug Foundation, adf.org.au, where you can access information, including the AIDEN site. You can get information there that is youth-specific for you and direct you to services. So I think it's word of mouth, asking questions, or going anonymously through a phone line or through a web-based approach.
Generally, we want young people to be informed so they can make decisions that are right for them. We can't tell you what to do, but we can hopefully give you information that allows you to make the right decision and keep you and the people around you and the people you love safe.